Are you ready to become a change maker? Our 48-week postgraduate program in public policy or the PGP may be just the thing for you. This hybrid program is designed to give you both the theoretical foundation and hands-on experience needed to excel in policy making. With a mix of expert-led webinars, in-person workshops, and policy simulation exercises, you'll gain real-world skills along with personalized mentorship. Through our policy programs, we connect good people to good ideas and good networks. Apply now at the link in the description to make an impact.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of All Things Policy. Today's episode is a special one because we are joined by someone who truly understands the seas, not just as lines on a map, but as living, strategic arteries that shapes the course of global power. I am Dr. Y. Nithiyanandam, professor at Takshashila Institution. Joining us is Vice Admiral A.K. Chawla, retired, a distinguished veteran of the Indian Navy and a respected strategic thinker. With decades of naval command, operational experience, and academic rigor behind him, the Admiral brings an unmatched blend of real-world insights and scholarly depth to today's conversation. So we are here to talk about his compelling new book, Maritime Power in China's Grand Strategy. This work dives deep into how China, once largely land-focused, is now rapidly expanding its naval capabilities, building overseas bases, and reshaping maritime geopolitics through tools like the Belt and Road Initiative and its powerful navy, the PLAN. Why does South China Sea matters? What is China's endgame in the Indo-Pacific? How is India placed in the changing oceanic chessboard? And why should you, our listeners, care about this? We'll just stay with us because over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack all of this and even more with someone who has been front lines of India's maritime strategy and has studied China's right with a sharp and seasoned eye. I welcome you, Admiral, to this show, and we look forward to your insights on this subject.
Thank you, Dr. Nithiyanandam. It's a pleasure to be with you to share some insights on maritime power, particularly with regard to China.
Yes. Thank you, Sob. The first thing comes to my mind is maritime power is more than just navies. Its ability of a nation to use seas for political, military, and economic gain. As Admiral Mahan famously argued, control over seas lanes has historically determined global dominance. From the British Empire to post World War II, um, you know, America had such dominance. So, what exactly is maritime power, and why does it matter so much in global strategy today?
As you rightly brought out, maritime power is not just about the navies. Maritime power of a country includes every aspect of its maritime life. Starting off, let's say, with the merchant marine, with the shipbuilding industry, its fishing
Right.
industry, the use of the seas for mineral and non-mineral resources in a sustainable manner, fishing, the entire fishing industry, maritime infrastructure which is there. When we talk about the navies and the security part, it's not just the navy, it's the coast guards, it is the other maritime security agencies such as the coastal police, such as the customs, the DRI, the drug interception agency. There are also users today which are part of the recreational use of the seas, the use of the seas for developing infrastructure such as nuclear power plants, etc., which require extensive cooling, so you require water. So the oceans are a huge resource, and the oceans themselves are the least mapped. We know more about, it's famously said, the surface of the Mars and the surface of Moon than we know about the undersea world that we inhabit. because that's more than
Yeah.
70% of the world. So maritime power
Right.
is a huge part of everything in our lives. We have emerged from the seas ourselves as living beings, and so we are vitally connected. So maritime power is a huge range of things, not just absolutely not the navies.
Okay. That's very interesting to start, Admiral. The second thing is China's geography has long kept it landwards looking, but with growing global trade, energy dependencies, and historical grievances, especially the so called century of humiliation, Beijing is now pouring massive resources into building marine strength. How and why China shifted traditionally a land focused power is turning towards sea? What triggered this maritime power?
So, for its entire history, and both India and China are very ancient civilizations. So, roughly going back to, let's say, 5,000 years, which we know
Right.
definitely about, and maybe longer. But when you see and my book covers this in the first chapter, when you see the maritime history of China, for most of its current almost 5,000 years of existence that we have in available in some form of documentary evidence or some other artifacts that have been recovered, it was a landward focused country because of the fact that it was surrounded by hostile borders and tribes, which were invading China, and that's why, of course, they built the Great Wall of China,
Yeah.
to keep the invaders out. But it was only for a brief period during the Ming Empire in the 15th and 16th centuries that China's maritime power, in terms of its adventurism beyond China, flourished. China was always a maritime trading power, trading with the as far afield as Africa. But it was only during the Ming Empire that they made a dedicated effort. They built a proper navy, but that effort was given up by the subsequent Ming emperor because he felt that that was sullying pure Chinese culture by importing things and people and trade, etc. New ideas were coming in, so he clamped down on that, and so it lay dormant. While China had a decent navy in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, because of its dominance by the Western powers, its maritime outreach and maritime power was limited. And this continued after it became the communist power that it is today in 1949. But even in that period, when it was focused once again on unifying the country and in warding off the threats from Russia or Soviet Union at that stage, and trying to consolidate its borders, Tibet included, which happened in the early 1950s. It concentrated mainly on land, but it did not stop from developing high technology. So, just as an example, it started developing nuclear submarines as early as the late 1950s, almost in sync with what was being done by the US and Soviet Union at that stage. Of course, it borrowed technology from the Soviet Union at that stage. But it was only in 1979, really, which was a turning point when Deng Xiaoping took power. And I think he's one of the most significant figures in modern Chinese history, because he realized that China had a huge advantage and capability of becoming an economic power. And he also realized that if you wanted to become an economic power or a global power, and he was the first person who saw China in that manner. Mao was more narrowly focused because he was trying to, get hold, unify the country and establish the communist dogma in the minds of people. But it was Deng who realized that maritime power is the bedrock of any global power. And he realized that no country has ever become a great power if it has not been a maritime power. And you can see examples historically about that also. The latest, of course, being the United States of America and now China. So he started this dedicated build-up, not just of the Chinese Navy, but of every aspect of China's maritime power. So whether it was shipbuilding, where China has today 73% of the world's orders in shipbuilding, whether it was the PLA Navy, which is today the largest navy in the world, not yet the most powerful, but it is definitely the
The
largest navy.
largest one.
Yeah. Also, the oceanic research that started there, the maximum number of research stations in Arctic and Antarctic. Also, the fisheries, they have the largest fishing fleet in the world. deep sea technology. They are the leaders today in deep sea technology. So he was the one who realized that this was important, and so he outsourced the security part to an Admiral Lee King, who was a visionary. Interestingly, he was originally an army officer and joined the navy
Oh,
later. So but he gave China its maritime vision, and what they realized was that China was very disadvantaged by its maritime geography. Unlike
okay.
India, which has free access, we are blessed with a unique access. So is the United States. So is, for example, the UK. So not all countries. For example, Germany has a very disadvantaged maritime position. It is only fronting the Baltic Sea, which itself is enclosed, so it can be choked. Similarly, if you see Russia, Russia has hardly any access. That's the reason it has got hold of Crimea. But even the Black Sea is enclosed by the Strait of Bosphorus. So not every country and every great power has unfettered access to the oceans. So he realized that China does not have it, fronted by these island chains, which are all hostile, most of them. And that is how the maritime strategy has been shaped. So it was basically to realize their economic development model, to realize the status of becoming a great power, that China realized that if it does not build its maritime power, it is not going to get there.
Right, right. Thank you, sir, for sharing such a wonderful insight, which is generally not available and in an open domain. I would request, the listeners to look into the new book, which covers most of this. And my next question is, Xi Jinping's, period. He's having the Chinese dream aim for national rejuvenation by 2049. How does the idea of Chinese dream relate to maritime dominance? Is sea power central to that vision? So,
Absolutely. You see, China is principally a trading nation. You see, the bedrock of any country's power is economic power. You cannot really be a military power unless you are a strong economic power. So the bedrock of economic power, as far as China is concerned, is global trade. It is the largest trading nation in the world. It is the largest trading partner of every country in the world except the US, Canada, and Mexico. I mean, while it is a huge trading partner with the US, but the US has equally strong trading links only with Canada and Mexico. Whereas China is the predominant trade partner if you compare the biggest economic power in the world, which is today the United States. It has far surpassed the United States in terms of trade relations. Uh, just as an example, the US is only 15% of China's trade. 85% is in other countries. So China has basically realized that if it wants to become a great power, it needs to become a great economic power. If it needs to become a great economic power, it is a trading nation, it's an exporting nation. It needs to export finished goods, it needs to import raw materials which it is deficient in, except rare earths, which it has in abundance. So it has built manufacturing capacity in every sector, and rare earths is a good example. While China has a sufficient stock of rare earths inside the country itself, but it's the only country, can you beat it? The only country which has got rare earth processing capability. No other country has it. I mean, while they have rare earths, they export it to China for them to process and re-export. So essentially, China has realized that if it has to realize the dream of becoming a superpower, they don't say openly sole superpower, but eventually the aim is to displace the United States from that position, and they only compare themselves with the United States. Then maritime power is an essential component, and actually, if you look at it, except in maritime military power, where the US is still the number one power, they have exceeded the US in every other maritime metric already. China has close to 55% of global shipbuilding. The US is less than 0.1%. So you see the amount of merchant marine that China has today, the amount of ships it's supplying, and so it's a self improving. It's a virtuous cycle that is there. It is building more ships, it is improving its technology, making it more cost effective, and making it very difficult for anybody else to compete. Of course, they started with state subsidies. So maritime power, not only to protect its trade routes which lie across the oceans, not only to ensure the supply lines of raw materials because it needs energy, it needs raw materials from other countries, but also to find new markets. So essentially, they have taken the playbook of the British Empire of the 18th and 19th centuries, which we know very well now, which was to establish colonies across the world. And once you have established colonies, you use the colonies to extract raw materials. And Britain was the factory of the world and export goods to them. Textiles, for example, in India, we had a flourishing textile industry, which they killed, the
Hmm.
British. And then they supplied us cloth from Manchester. That's why Gandhiji started the Khadi revolution
Yeah.
to make
Yeah.
in India, to make cloth in India. So without maritime power, and maritime power is a significant component. Almost 15% maritime industries contribute to China's GDP. If you look at the trade, that is another 25%. So you will see overall anything related to the seas will finally come to more than 55 to 60% of its GDP. And that GDP that it is generating is being used to generate maritime power, military power, and other maritime power in terms of research, etc. So they have realized that this is a very, very strong component of what it needs to become a global maritime power, a global power of consequence, great power.
Thanks for sharing this interesting statistics, and especially the way you have said how they follow Britishers is something very interesting to understand. How one can adapt the older strategies from by modifying it for the present day requirement and still make use of it. So that's interesting. And then in connection with that, they've also made string of pearls and initiatives like BRI, especially in case of string of pearls. The Chinese investment in ports across the Indian Ocean, Gwadar, Hambantota, and more. When it comes to BRI, China combined commercial presence with strategic access, raising both opportunity and alarm at the same time. In your book, you describe the String of Pearls and Belt and Road Initiative as key part of Chinese maritime ambition. Could you explain these in simple terms and what they mean for countries like India?
So, purely developing maritime military power is not enough to make you a maritime power, and obviously not enough to make you a great power. Now, the Chinese started building maritime infrastructure, particularly in South Asia, from the 1990s. And this was only noticed really because they were doing it sporadically, investing in ports and maritime infrastructure somewhere, a little bit in Sri Lanka, a little bit in Myanmar, a little bit in Bangladesh, in a much bigger manner in Pakistan, some ports in Africa, etc. And they were doing it in places which were sources of raw material for them, or which they required for strategic purposes. For example, Kyaukphu in Myanmar, to establish a oil pipeline between Kyaukphu and Kunming, that is the southernmost, the landlocked province of China, which borders Myanmar. Similarly, Gwadar was at that time envisaged as entry port to Xinjiang, by road through Pakistan, which finally became the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So all these developments were happening sporadically, and then somewhere in the early 21st century, the string of pearls was coined by an American think tank, which had been outsourced this study by the United States Defense Department, and they called it a string of pearls, basically a series of ports being developed and maritime infrastructure being developed across the Indian Ocean, in South Asia in particular, to circumvent what China saw as the Malacca dilemma, because 70% of China's trade, goods, oil, etc., passes through the Malacca Strait, for South Asia, for Africa, for Europe. It all goes through the Strait of Malacca, and of course, if it goes to Europe, it finally goes through the Suez Canal as well. So Malacca Strait was seen by them as a choke point, which could be intercepted in times of crisis or war. So they were trying to find ways of circumventing, and so that's why the pipeline was made from Kyaukphu to Kunming, and the Gwadar port was being thought of. These were two of the things. There were many other initiatives they had taken, but this continued sporadically. The Chinese, of course, this is not a Chinese term, the string of pearls. It's a Western term which we picked up.
Okay.
But it was only in 2015 that they formally announced or formalized this entire thing as the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Belt and Road Initiative has two legs. One is the landward leg, that's the Silk Road Economic Belt, SREB as it is called, which runs through Central Asia and Russia, Ukraine, etc., and goes to and Eastern Europe and ends up in Amsterdam, Western Europe. And the that's as per their plan. And then there was the Maritime Silk Road, which runs through the South China Sea, through Southeast Asia, through the Malacca Strait, to South Asia, through the Suez Canal, to the Mediterranean. And both these belts were designed keeping in mind the fact that these are the places where China has got markets. These are the places from where they get their resources. And these are the places where they need security for their trade and possibly military bases in the future. So, as I mentioned in answer to the previous question, they are following the British playbook. So, instead of physical colonization or of countries as the British did, and the British had an empire on which the sun never set, they are doing economic colonization. So, Belt and Road Initiative was countries were chosen, particularly the least developed countries with unstable regimes, autocratic regimes. Pakistan is a classic example where they invested a huge amount, and Pakistan is the largest investment, $60 billion is the investment, which of course the Pakistanis will never be able to pay back. And so they are indebted. So countries were indebted to them, and in return for waiving off debts or delaying the debts, because China very rarely waives off any debts, they sought and got concessions. For example, Hamantata Port, they are the sole operator. Gwadar Port, they are the sole operator. Of course, they are not military bases, but they can be used for quasi-military purposes. And maybe in the future, you don't know how it develops, they could become military bases as well. So the maritime strategy of China to become a maritime power as a part of its entire thrust to become a global power, the Belt and Road Initiative is an integral part of it, particularly the Maritime Silk Road. The SREB runs over land, so it's not a maritime initiative. But the Maritime Silk Road is a fact today. They have more than 100 ports across the world which they actually run, ports and container terminals, and they are growing by the day. So everything is software driven. So they have the knowledge of what moves through that. That intelligence is already available with them. They have influence in these ports. Some of them they have been removed now. For example, Australia from Port Darwin, or in Italy from one of the ports that they had taken over, Greece rather. They are now slowly being evicted. But the fact is, they are enmeshed in hundreds of ports across the world, which gives them immense economic leverage over these countries. And slowly, because of the inroads that they have made, they have also started putting military bases. So Djibouti is the first military base, and it's no surprise because Djibouti's national debt to China is more than 80% of its GDP, just to China alone. So, and these are pliable leaders. So they come with suitcases, of the right stuff, and people sign contracts which are not entirely in the interest of the country, and then they build the infrastructure. But to their credit, they do build decent infrastructure. If you go to these countries, I've been to several countries in Africa and South Asia where BRI infrastructure has been built. And while it is excessive at first, but then they do a pretty decent job. They build it fast. They build it reasonably well. They are improving their standards. So ultimately, that gives them a huge amount of political leverage, which then ensures that they have a say in the country's policy, in their markets. They get preferential treatment in terms of taxes, etc. And so it is a sort of a immense source of political and economic power for them, and ultimately that relate translates into military power.
Thank you. Thank you so for the detailed one. In fact, it's interesting to understand how the dual purpose investments are made and where it is made and what is the current status and what will be the projection in future of these areas. Especially, we have seen the massive developments in Hambantota and Gwadar, like before and after the investments in our research. It's quite amazing the way the infrastructures are built. And from other researchers, we also understand the community is being developed in these areas. The Chinese community is being down. Chinatown is established in Gwadar and so on. So they're slowly moving towards utilizing the facility fully to a maximum extent possible. That's very interesting to follow up also for the researchers. Now the next question is on China is now the world largest navy by fleet size, at least, with ambitions to become blue water power. Its submarine force, carrier fleet, and missile capabilities reflects a decisive shift from coastal defense to global navigation projection. Admiral, from your experience in Indian Navy, how do you view China's rapid naval buildup, especially its aircraft carriers and submarines?
So, as I mentioned, this really began in earnest in the late 1970s, 1979 to be exact. While its nuclear submarine program had started in the 50s, but it was only in 1981 really that their first ballistic missile nuclear submarine, the Zia class, sailed out. And it was an experimental submarine, didn't do too well. Now, of course, they are much more adept and they've got uh, almost 10 SSBNs with them. So today they are a maritime power of significance, of considerable significance. They are the largest navy. They are to my mind, the second most powerful navy in the world after the United States, though metrics show it otherwise. But the fact is that their ships are being built at a huge rate. They are expanding at a massive rate. They already have close to 500 warships today as compared to the United States, probably around 300 odd warships. They have uh, developed these warships, in technologically. So today they are approaching and in some cases exceeding Western standards. And shortly they will exceed Western standards in terms of technology. Things like underwater quietness, things like the ranges of the missiles, the number of missiles that they can carry, the kind of armament that they have. And if you look at the aircraft carrier program as such, they bought the first floating aircraft carrier from Ukraine, which was an unfinished aircraft carrier on the pretext in 1999 of making it a floating casino of Macau. So it was stored to Macau from Ukraine under that pretext. But we all knew it was going to be a Chinese aircraft carrier ultimately. And it took them about 13, 14 years. So 2013, they actually commissioned it as their first the aircraft carrier, the Liaoning. And then based on the Liaoning's design, they built their second indigenous carrier. That indigenous carrier was
How much time they have taken to build the second one, sir?
second one took about 6 years to be built. So it was not a very long period by any consequence. And now the third one, which is a fully indigenous design, a much more bigger ship, about almost 2.5 times the size of the Liaoning, which carries almost 3 times the aircraft carrier wing on board, approaching close to the size of the US carriers, not as big. That is being designed. And the nuclear carrier program has got delayed, uh, which is natural, but it is underway. They have built simulators, satellite information is available. So we expect that within the next decade, the nuclear powered aircraft carrier will also be there. In terms of the aircraft launch capability, the Catobar launch, which is a magnetic launch system, which is only available with the US, has already been put on the third aircraft carrier by the Chinese, and that's an indigenous technology that they have developed. Of course, there's a lot of technologies they have copied from the West, but the fact is that they are very good at copying, and then they're very good at improving it further. So the maritime power of China is developing to a point where when from the early 1980s, where they were insignificant really in terms of surface ships. Today they are a significant force. And as far as India is concerned, there is always a force of 6 to 8 warships today in the Indian Ocean region of China, which was unheard of prior to 2008. Just till 2008, there were hardly a very infrequent visits by the Chinese Navy. But 2008, they started coming in under the pretext of the anti-piracy efforts in the Gulf of Aden, including sending a nuclear-powered submarine to for anti-piracy missions. That's only the Chinese can justify sending an SSN but it was obviously for gaining experience. So today they are a maritime power, which, as far as India is concerned, is of serious reckoning. They have got SSNs, nuclear attack submarines, six of them. Two more are being commissioned. They have a huge number of surface warships, improving every year. And we expect that they will deploy their aircraft carrier to the Indian Ocean, the aircraft carrier group, within this decade, definitely. And it might then become a permanent fixture in the future. So when you have maritime power of that significance, then obviously you are a deterrent force to start off with, and you build in much more influence with the countries in the neighborhood. So the maritime power of China is something that needs to be countered by India, and we need to be very wary of it.
Right. So also you talked about concepts like sea denial and sea control. Uh, for a general listener, could you explain what this mean with examples from the South China Sea or Taiwan Strait perspective? So,
Yeah. So sea denial essentially means that you deny the use of a particular area of the sea by the adversary while not controlling it yourself. That means you're not in control, but you deny the access to the other person. And that is normally done by platforms such as submarines, by maritime patrol aircraft armed with missiles. So that means you're not there yourself physically controlling it. Of course, the submarines are there, but they submarines are unseen platforms, so they don't really command presence, or they don't really control an area, because if they come up, they're vulnerable. But they can attack a ship which is there. So sea denial is essentially to deny the use of a sea by the adversary while not being able to control it yourself. Whereas sea control means you have control over a particular sea area, and sea control is limited by time and space. You can't control all the sea for all the time. So sea control is also defined by time and space. That what is the sea area exactly that you're talking about, and what is the time period that you're talking about. So when you have sea control, which is what a stronger navy or a stronger nation will do, you control it yourself, and obviously you deny it in parallel to the adversary. So sea denial essentially is a little bit like being a dog in the manger. It's something which is the recourse of a weaker maritime power. Sea control is something which is the recourse of a stronger maritime
stronger
power.
one. Yeah.
And then there is a third stage also, this that is command of the seas. Command of the seas means that you really command the oceans, and there is no real time and space limitations, which means you are a maritime power of such significance that others are irrelevant, or I mean, even if they are present, they can't deter you from their presence, which has only been achieved for short periods by Great Britain in the 19th century, and by the United States for a short period after the Second World War, and for a short period after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So these are the three terms that are used. And so China has moved from being a navy, sea denial navy, based on the concepts of sea denial. So platforms which are based on sea denial, submarines, shore attack batteries, small missile boats hiding in caves to attack the enemy when they came close to the coast, to now being in control of the South China Sea, and then going on beyond to control the seas beyond the first island chain.
So then
So
now they moved to the stage two, right?
their maritime strategy has already shifted to a stage of sea control in 2015, and they have already talked about command of the seas in 2004. Obviously, they have not
Okay.
achieved it, and it will be very difficult to achieve command of the seas. But they are already a navy with ambitions of sea control, and they are exercising that sea control. So when you talk about the Taiwan Strait and Taiwan in itself, or South China Sea, today they have sea control over the South China Sea, not just because of the navy, but they've also reclaimed islands. They built military installations, and they similarly, as far as Taiwan is concerned, with the amount of force levels that they've got and the kind of exercises that they're doing, circling Taiwan repeatedly, and this is increasing in frequency as time goes on, particularly over the last 4 years. It's very difficult to see any country, including the United States, actually opposing an armed takeover of Taiwan should China attempt to do it. Whether it does it or not, of course, is a $1 million question.
Yeah. Yeah. So Before before answering this question, you talked about the utilization of resources for dual purpose. That is slightly playing on the gray zone. It is always blamed these days, like China integrates civilian assets like merchant ships and fishing fleets into its strategy. Is this a gray zone tactic, and how should democracies respond to this?
Yeah. So interestingly, my next book is on that topic: maritime gray zone
Nice.
warfare, 360-degree view, and I've just finished a couple of chapters on that. Now, gray zone warfare is the warfare of the 21st century, and it's not new. But between kinetic warfare, the formal declaration of war, etc., and wars which are fought at a level below the kinetic effects of warfare, that is a shooting war, if you can say in simple terms, they are the more common wars of today, and they are 24/7, 365-day wars, particularly over the cyberspace, particularly in terms of public information warfare, psychological warfare, perception management. That is one aspect of this. The other aspect which China has been very smart to use are the non-naval assets. So, for example, they've got the maritime militia, which is drawn from their fishing fleet, but manned by ex-naval personnel or ex-Coast Guard personnel. They have the Coast Guard, which is fronting, and Navy is, of course, the backup. But when grey hulls, as we speak in the Navy, get into it, then it becomes an act of war. So they have used the integration of all these things, that is perception management, information warfare, lawfare, using maritime laws to their advantage, cartographic aggression, renaming territories, showing different maps, using the legal loopholes in the UNCLOS Convention, then using trade, and as I mentioned, the ports that they have got, using them as part of the gray zone warfare. For example, when Philippines went to the International Court of Arbitration against their annexation of the Mischief Reef, China stopped import of fruits from Philippines. Now that was a major export for the Philippines. So finally, Philippines, while they won the case, could not do anything. They have won the case, but there is no implementation of the judgment because China was not party to that arbitration. And so it uses all levers of power. So essentially, it is political warfare, it is economic warfare, information warfare, cyber warfare, all these aspects combined into one. And in terms of physical space in the maritime zone, it are using the non-military assets to pursue their territorial claims, establish control over various reefs in the South China Sea, ultimately build military base on them. So if you are there for 25 years, you can legally establish ownership, then claiming waters around them as territorial waters, which is not permitted under UNCLOS, but then they are pursuing different zones of UNCLOS. So all these factors are being used by China as in their gray zone warfare, and that is why the United States has watched helplessly. All they could do is freedom of navigation patrols, but legally there's nothing they can do because it's not a war. It's and certainly
Hmm.
not a war where the
It's
United
a gray
States.
zone.
It's a gray zone.
Yeah.
So this has been a most effective use by China, and I think as far as India is concerned, we need to sort of wake up and smell the leaves, as they say, because this is also happening against us in various ways. Even what Pakistan is doing, the dastardly massacre that happened in Pahalgam just 2 days ago, is also a part of grey zone warfare. Because every time something happens, we know Pakistan, the Pakistani state or the army is behind it, but there is very difficult to find a linkage. Sometimes you find it, sometimes you don't, between the terrorists, because they have become more adept and more smart at concealing their footprints or fingerprints from these things. So gray zone warfare is something that is with us 24/7, 365 days, and we have to have a strategy to counter it. And the last thing I'll mention is, because it's a huge topic, is that gray zone warfare cannot be fought by a single agency alone. It requires a
Right.
comprehensive national approach. It requires a whole of government approach. It is a narrative, a story which has to be built up, in which different sections of the government have got different roles to play. and it has to be synchronized if it has to be effective. Because ultimately, any form of warfare is being done for a political end, and the Chinese are very adept and alive to that fact.
Yeah. So since we are running out of time, so I'll just blend two of my questions, which is going on in my mind. It's a very simple question, like how well we are matching Chinese tempo in, from the Indian side. And the subsequent question is, what advice would you offer for Indians, young Indians, especially students and professionals, on why maritime matters for the nation's future? So, if you can answer these two things, I think that would be a good thing for a common listener also.
If one has to be frank, we are not matching China. So I would start off with that. In terms of shipbuilding, if you see, we are almost the same as the United States. Less than 0.1% of global shipbuilding is in India, despite our cost competitiveness, despite the fact that we have ample ports and infrastructure. More infrastructure is obviously required, but and you compare that to China's over 55%, you're not anywhere in that league at all. Secondly, when you look at trade, India has a lot of catching up to do. So in terms of maritime trade, China is far ahead of the United States also. So India is while India is the fourth largest economy today, but this gulf is very wide between the first and second, and then the third and the fourth. In terms of maritime military power, we are doing our best, but I think we cannot really match the deep pockets of, because maritime power is expensive. And as I mentioned, that's why Chinese, Deng Xiaoping's four modernizations, the economic modernization was the first, and defense was the last. And he said, bide your time and hide your stick, until the time is right. So he bided the time till the Chinese economy built up, when they could start spending. And the amount they're spending, they are the second largest defense budget in the world by far. In terms of PPP, it is higher than the United States, because what the United States can build its ships, the China can build it at less than half the cost, the same ship. So in terms of that, they are even higher than the US, and this is by a US think tank itself. Their Navy think tank has brought this out. So in terms of maritime power, sheer number of ships being counting, we are far behind. Now, we have advantages, of course. We have advantages because if somebody comes into the Indian Ocean region, we are the resident power there. So we are close to the area. So we have interior lines of communication, as we call them. China will have exterior lines of communication. It has to support its forces at a much longer distance. That is where the naval bases come in. So that is the other effort we have to do to ensure that we can't keep China or any other country physically out of the ocean. We can use our influence to ensure that they don't become a resident power somewhere, like Djibouti. That means, like Djibouti, they don't get more bases. To make people understand, I just say that just imagine tomorrow if the United States naval presence in the Indian Ocean region is replaced by China. Just imagine that. They've got military bases across the Indian Ocean region, from Digo Garcia to the Gulf and up to Singapore. And so they have resident forces here. They have a resident aircraft carrier group. They've got an amphibious ready group. They've got other forces in the Gulf which are there. So if that is replaced by China, just imagine India's position then, because the US is not a hostile power to us. China is. So then the whole game with China changes. So that's why even to the young people, I'll say that in terms of prosperity, if you're really looking at India becoming a global power, which India has the entire potential to do it. I mean, we have the population, we have the skill sets, we have the access to the seas, unfettered access. We have island territories strategically located. We have goodwill across the Indian Ocean region. We have history with us. We have soft power with us. We have cultural influence with us. We are known across this region as a law-abiding and a force for good. We have, until now, we have maintained the peace in the Indian Ocean region for everybody's sake, not just for India's sake. And we've always helped out countries in times of their need. So we have a great, fund of goodwill, which is there. But then ultimately, goodwill is just not enough. There are also other inducements that come in. So we need to develop a maritime power not just for the economic development. I mean, just look at one sector. If you look at shipbuilding, there's a huge scope. I mean, we are almost at ground zero. If you look at the export sector, we are at a very nascent stage. It's developing, but there's a lot of scope to go. So I think this is an area which is critical for India's development. It's critical for our cultural, historical, civilizational development, and it is something that has been historically ignored since the, I would say, that ninth century after the Cholas. They were the last maritime power of any significance that India had. After that, for various reasons, historically the maritime power has gone down. And I'll just remind the youngsters of one last thing, which Sardar Panikkar, he's one of the foremost maritime authors of India, very astute thinker. He mentioned that India never lost her independence until she lost control of the Indian Ocean, which was to the Europeans in the 16th century. We had never lost our independence. We only became a colony when the foreigners came in through the seas. And who brought them? We only guided them here because they didn't have the skill of navigation. But once they came here, because of the superior maritime power, they sort of colonized us, and everybody knows that story. So I think this is something that needs to be borne in mind by all of us.
Thank you, sir, for sharing such a wonderful insight, and thank you for joining us. And we really enjoyed the insightful discussion on maritime power and China's grand strategy, especially. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nitya. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.